The U.S. state of Florida is the nation's third most populous state, behind the states of California and Texas respectively. Florida is renowned worldwide for its numerous beaches, sunny warm weather, oranges, the eyebrow-raising antics of the male criminals that reside there, and of course, the state's animal mascot, alligators, which can be found in every corner of the state. American alligators are reptilian apex predators that inhabit warm swamps and rivers in the southern United States. American alligators are the largest extant species of alligator and one of only two surviving alligator species, along with the smaller Chinese alligator. Alligators closely resemble their evolutionary cousins, crocodiles, which are much more common and widespread throughout numerous regions throughout the world. Alligators and crocodiles can be easily differentiated by the shape of their snouts, as crocodiles have long, thin snouts, while alligators have wider, more squared in appearance snouts. American alligators are some of the world's largest reptiles, as adult males can reach lengths of 15 feet or more in the wild, with these larger males often weighing in above 1,000 pounds, with some of the largest spotted specimens having their weights estimated at over a ton. These fearsome apex predators have incredibly powerful jaws that clamp down upon their prey with a measured bite force of up to 2,961 foot-pounds, and the force of its bite is only topped by the world's largest reptile and its evolutionary relative, the saltwater crocodile. However, the muscles that open the jaws are quite weak and can be easily held shut by hand or by a common alligator wrangling staple, duct tape. These powerful jaws allow alligators to clamp down on their prey and deliver a bite strong enough to allow them to chomp through bone and turtle shells with ease, and with larger prey, the alligator will drag them into the water and thrash them about to break their bones and incapacitate them before holding them beneath the water to drown, and American alligators have even been documented hunting other apex predators such as black bears. Alligators, much like crocodiles, are ambush predators and are difficult to spot due to their low profile within the water, which leaves little but their eyes and nose exposed above the surface of the water, which they lie in wait within. Furthermore, American alligators are also very intelligent animals, as they've been observed balancing sticks on their heads to attract nesting birds, making it one of the few animals outside of primates and birds that have been observed using tools. American alligators are such efficient and effective predators that fossils with bone structures identical to modern American alligators have been recovered that date back as far as 2.5 million years, with their unchanged bone structure suggesting that no evolutionary adaptations for their survival from beyond this point were needed, which makes alligators literally prehistoric killing machines, built to kill and tested throughout the ages. With approximately one alligator for every 20 people in the state of Florida, alligator encounters are a near inevitable fact of life for residents of the state, and caution must be exercised when approaching or entering bodies of water in Florida, lest one end up caught in the crushing clasp of an alligator's mighty maw. The first documented alligator-related fatality in the state of Florida took place in June of 1957, when a 9-year-old boy named Alan Rice was reported missing after he had not returned to his home in Eau Florida, after going outside to play along the banks of the nearby Horse Creek. Some of the boy's heavily mutilated remains were located by the Civil Air Patrol, and an 11-foot alligator was spotted within the vicinity of these remains. The gator was killed by authorities, and further remains belonging to Alan Rice were located in the gator's stomach and intestinal tract. Notably, however, authorities did speculate that the condition of the boy's body and the quantity of remains recovered from the euthanized gator's carcass suggested that Alan had been gnawed on by several gators before his body's discovery. The next alligator-related fatality in Florida would take place 2 years later in 1959, according to several local news outlets, although further details about the incident have seemingly been lost over time. There were no further fatal documented alligator incidents in Florida over the next decade and into the 1970s, up until the year 1973. At around dusk on August 16, 1973, a 16-year-old girl named Sharon Holmes was swimming in Oscar Shearer State Park in Sarasota County, Florida, along with her father, when she was attacked by a male alligator measuring 11 foot 3 inches long. Sharon's father, who witnessed the attack, attempted to free his daughter from the alligator's lethal grip as it thrashed her about within the water. Unfortunately, however, he was unable to free his daughter from the gator's grasp. Her body was recovered later by authorities, and the offending gator was hunted and killed by officials as well. Notably, the gator that had attacked Sharon was popular with the park's visitors and was regularly fed by them, which was further evidenced by the contents of the animal's digestive tract, which authorities reasoned likely increased its aggressiveness. The next alligator-related fatality would occur just 4 years after Sharon's death in 1977. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on September 29, 1977, a 52-year-old man named George Leonard was swimming in the Peace River Canal in Charlotte County, Florida, when he was bitten and attacked by a 7-foot female alligator. Unlike the previous victims, however, after a bloody, prolonged tussle with this comparatively smaller alligator, George was able to break free from the alligator's grasp and flee back to shore, where he was then subsequently rushed to the hospital with critical injuries. Unfortunately, he was unable to recover from his wounds and subsequently died in the hospital 3 days later on October 2nd. The final fatal gator attack of the 1970s would take place less than a year following George Leonard's death, this time in Martin County, Florida. On September 10, 1978, at around noon, a 14-year-old boy named Philip Rastrelli was swimming in the Hidden River Canal off of Bessie Creek when he was attacked by a male alligator measuring 11 feet long. Unfortunately, further details about his death, much like the 1959 incident, seemingly have been lost over the years. The first fatal alligator encounter of the 1980s would take place 6 years later in the year 1984. On August 6, 1984, at around 4:30 p.m., an 11-year-old boy named Robert Crespo was swimming in a canal at Rivergate Park in Port St. Lucie when he was attacked by a huge 12-foot 4-inch long, 550-pound male alligator. The attack was witnessed by numerous fishermen and boaters who watched in shock and horror as the gargantuan gator pulled Robert beneath the surface of the water and thrashed him about within the canal. Wildlife and game officials were in the vicinity at the time of the attack and rushed to the boy to attempt to aid him by shooting the gator. However, the gunfire did not deter the gator, and Robert Crespo was killed by the massive alligator before authorities were able to neutralize it. The next deadly alligator attack would take place under a year later, in May of 1985. On May 4th, 1985, near Wellington, Florida, a 27-year-old man named Paul Mirabito and his friend, a man named Kenneth Wells, embarked on a fishing trip in the local canals with their children in tow. As the group was fishing throughout the day, Paul would often plunge into the water to cool off, and when he did so, he would pretend to be drowning for the children's amusement. After a relatively uneventful day of fishing, they entered the last canal they had planned to fish in for the day. Paul jumped into the water, as he had all day, pretending to drown as he did so. However, he soon realized that in the waters of this canal, he was in the company of several smaller alligators. Paul then presumably began to panic, and one of the children on board the boat recalled that he began punching at the smaller alligators, and then, suddenly, he disappeared beneath the surface as a large alligator pulled him under. Only one of the children on board the boat saw him slip beneath the surface, and as Paul had been pretending to drown upon entering the water all day, the group aboard the boat was not immediately concerned with his sudden submersion. When he did not resurface after a few minutes, the boaters assumed that this was all part of the act and reasoned that he could have swam underwater to shore, since it was the final canal they planned to hit for the day. Paul's disappearance was finally reported to authorities 12 hours after he had initially disappeared. Paul's body was unable to be located until 3 days later, when on May 7, 1985, workers at a nearby water pumping station discovered his rapidly decomposing body at their worksite. His body was covered in numerous injuries, including a large gash on his neck that showed evidence of wounds that were consistent with alligator bites. The offending alligator wasn't able to be located by authorities, and thus the size of the gator that claimed Paul Mirabito's life remains unknown. The next deadly alligator incident in Florida took place in Wakulla Springs State Park, located just outside of the city of Tallahassee, on July 13, 1987. At around 2 p.m. on the afternoon of the 13th, a 29-year-old man named George Cummings III was snorkeling in a roped-off swimming hole that was fed by spring water. However, George Cummings continued on past the cordoned-off section of the swimming hole downstream to an area that was known to be inhabited by hundreds of alligators. While swimming in approximately 8-foot deep waters, he was attacked by an 11-foot-long male alligator who quickly dragged him beneath the surface of the water. The attack was witnessed by several people in the area who contacted authorities. However, it would not be the authorities that would ultimately track down the offending gator, as it was actually spotted by a passing tourist boat and their guide. As one of the tourist passengers of the craft recalled, quote, "The guide said, 'It looks like he just caught his lunch. Looks like a young deer.' But when the alligator lifted its head, I saw what I thought was the head and shoulders of a young man," the horrified passenger recalled. Following the discovery of George's body, the alligator that had perpetrated the vicious attack was shot and killed. The fourth and final lethal alligator encounter in Florida in the 1980s would take place not long after George Cummings III's death, just under a year later. On June 4, 1988, in Englewood, Florida, 3 local children, a 4-year-old girl named Erin Glover and her brother, 8-year-old Justin Glover, along with their dog and their neighbor, a 9-year-old boy named Jason Kershanek, were playing on the south shore of a small residential lake near their homes. At approximately 6:30 p.m. that evening, the kids were playing together on the shore bank, and 4-year-old Erin waded into the lake's waters, where she threw rocks and kicked and splashed about. This commotion drew the attention of a 10-foot 7-inch long male alligator who leapt from the water as soon as Erin had stopped splashing in it and bit her twice in the stomach area of her torso before it dragged her back into the water and beneath the surface. The neighbor, 9-year-old Jason Kershanek, recalled of the incident, quote, "The little girl was throwing rocks and kicking the water. While she was kicking, she must have kicked the alligator. Right when she stopped kicking, the alligator jumped up out of the water and started biting her 2 times in the stomach. Then he dropped her and crawled away, and then he got out of the water more and grabbed her from the back and went in the water. After it happened, then we ran. It was pretty quick. It seemed like a nightmare, a dream. But then the way she screamed when I saw the blood after he went in, then I realized it was real," Jason recounted of the horrifying attack. By the following morning, the offending alligator was located by authorities and was killed and confirmed to be the gator that had perpetrated the attack that killed 4-year-old Erin Glover. Notably, Jason's mother had filed several complaints about alligators that lived in the small lake before the deadly incident. However, as gators can be found in just about every body of freshwater in Florida, no action was taken as a result of her complaints. The first deadly alligator attack of the 1990s occurred 5 years after Aaron Glover's death in the year 1993. At approximately 6 p.m. on June 19, 1993, a local Little League team and their parents were celebrating the end of the season with a 7-mile canoe trip down the Loxahatchee River in Jonathan Dickinson State Park in Martin County, Florida. Approximately halfway through their journey down the river, the group's path was impeded by several downed trees. The adults of the group set to work clearing the obstacles, and while they did so, one member of the group, a 10-year-old boy named Bradley Weidenhamer, exited his canoe to join a group of people, relaxing and playing in the shallow waters nearby. As Bradley was wading through the shallows, he was suddenly attacked by an 11-foot 4-inch long gator, which clamped its mighty jaws down over the boy's entire head and sunk its teeth into his neck. Witnesses at the scene leapt into action to attempt to rescue the boy, striking the gator with canoe paddles and whatever else they could find, while others attempted to free Bradley from the gator's maw. After a few minutes, the gator finally relented, and the group was able to free Bradley from its grip. They placed the boy in a canoe and performed CPR as they rushed him downstream to a waiting ambulance, where he was then flown to a nearby hospital via helicopter. Unfortunately, not long after his arrival at the hospital, Bradley died as a result of severe injuries to his head and neck. The next alligator-related death in Florida would take place just a few short months after Bradley Weidenhamer's death, in October of 1993. On October 3rd, 1993, in Wildwood, Florida, clad in a white nightgown and white sandals, a 70-year-old woman named Grace Eberhardt went for a stroll outdoors to get some fresh air near a 4-acre local pond in her quiet country club neighborhood. Grace often visited the ponds in the mornings, frequently sitting on benches nearby to read books while also enjoying the outdoors. Although many of the exact details of the attack are unknown, at some point during her visit to the pond, Grace was attacked by one or more alligators, who summarily broke her neck and mauled her. Grace's unfortunate fate was discovered later that day by her neighbors, who horrifically stumbled across 2 alligators engaged in a tug-of-war with her body in a dispute over it. When authorities arrived at the scene, her body was dismembered and very badly mangled, and thus they set to work killing alligators in the vicinity in an attempt to recover Grace's missing arms and hands. And even after killing 5 of the local gators, they were still unable to locate her missing appendages. An autopsy of Grace's body revealed that she had likely died from a broken neck that resulted from a bite to the head, and then she had subsequently been feasted upon by multiple different gators after she had perished. The next fatal alligator incident in Florida occurred on March 27, 1997, when a 3-year-old boy named Adam Binford and his mother were out walking around Lake Ashby, a popular local swimming destination that had a section roped off to allow for swimmers. Adam and his mother had wandered just outside the roped-off swimming section of the lake and were picking wildflowers from along the lake's banks when Adam took a step into the water. He then turned towards his mother and extended his hand to give his mother some of the wildflowers he'd gathered, when, without warning, at 12:43 p.m., a huge 11-foot male alligator snatched the tyke up in his jaws and disappeared back into the lake's murky waters as Adam's mother watched in horror. Adam's body wouldn't be located until 2.5 days later, when a local trapper found his corpse in the vicinity of an 11-foot alligator, which he killed and held for authorities to examine afterwards, and also recovered Adam's body from the waters. The gator killed by the trapper was later confirmed to have been the perpetrating reptile from the attack after a thorough examination of the gator's intestinal tract. Adam's tragic death would mark the final alligator-related fatality in Florida of the millennium. The first fatal alligator incident of the 2000s took place on May 4th, 2001, in the city of Venice, Florida. A 70-year-old man named Samuel Wetmore, who suffered from dementia, wandered from his residence to a small pond nearby. His lifeless body was discovered later that day, floating in the pond, with an 8-foot 4-inch alligator hovering around near his body. The alligator was subsequently killed, and an autopsy confirmed that it was indeed the gator that had killed Samuel. The next fatality would take place just mere weeks after Samuel's death in Winter Haven, Florida. On June 23, 2001, a 2-year-old girl named Alexandria Murphy was playing in the backyard of her home, which was located on the shores of Lake Cannon. Alexandria was left alone in the fenced backyard to play, while her mother and grandmother were inside the house, and somehow the little girl managed to escape the yard and wandered towards the water. Just 700 feet from her home, Alexandria was snapped up by a 6-foot 6-inch long alligator, who held her beneath the water until she drowned, as an autopsy would later reveal. The suspected alligator was killed and examined, and was confirmed to have been the perpetrator of the attack. Officials further noted that the gator may have been fed by the area's residents, which may have emboldened the reptile and caused it to lose its instinctual fear of humans. This second fatal alligator encounter in the state of Florida in 2001 would not prove to be the year's last, however, as the next lethal alligator incident took place just a few months later in September of 2001. In fact, the next rather unusual death would take place on one of the most infamous days in America's history, September 11th, 2001. At approximately 4:15 p.m., an 81-year-old man named Robert Steele was walking his dog in between two swampy canals near his home on Sanibel Island when he and his dog had an encounter with a 10-foot 9-inch long alligator. What exactly happened during this encounter is unknown, although authorities speculated that the dog had attracted the attention of the gator and that Robert may have been trying to protect his dog when he was bitten by the gator, who pulled him into one of the nearby canals. His wife heard his screaming and assumed he'd fallen in and was drowning, and was rather perplexed after discovering him in the canal, as she recounted of the time of the attack, quote, "I had no idea it was an alligator. His legs were still in the water, and there was no blood. We live among alligators. We protect them. They've never attacked us before," she said. Authorities were easily able to locate the offending alligator nearby, as it was found still clutching Robert's leg in its mouth. The gator was skittish and defensive of the leg, which subsequently made it difficult for officials to kill, and it withstood hits from multiple .357 Magnum rounds before it was finally felled by a shot to the head. Another 6-foot alligator that was believed to have also eaten a portion of Robert Steele's leg was also euthanized in the aftermath of the attack. The next fatality took place in June of 2003, when a 12-year-old boy named Brian Griffin was attacked while he was swimming near a boat ramp in the Dead River, which is located in Lake County, Florida. Brian was bitten and dragged beneath the water's surface by a 10-foot 4-inch long, 334-pound alligator. The offending gator, along with several other large gators inhabiting the area, were killed following Brian Griffin's death. Almost exactly a year later, on June 21, 2004, a 54-year-old landscaper named Janie Melsek was doing work for a client on Sanibel Island when she was attacked by a massive 12-foot 3-inch long, 457-pound alligator, which clamped down on her right arm and dragged her into a nearby pond. Neighbors heard Janie's screams and rushed to her aid, and their numbers were soon bolstered by several armed police officers as well. After a prolonged struggle with the huge gator, the police officers were able to shoot and kill the animal, which was so large and heavy that it took 6 police officers to haul its carcass out of the water and onto the shore. Janie was still alive and was rushed to the hospital, where upon arrival, she was immediately sent into surgery for her severe injuries, which included a partial amputation of her right arm. However, during her scuffle with the massive reptile, Janie had also contracted an unspecified infection from either the pond or the gator itself, and unfortunately, 3 days after her ordeal with the alligator, she succumbed to the infection in the hospital. The following fatal gator interaction would come later that year in September of 2004. In the early morning hours of September 26, 2004, a 20-year-old woman named Michelle Reeves went for a late-night swim in a small retention pond at the Lee Memorial Health Park in Fort Myers, Florida. Michelle was a native of the neighboring state of Georgia and was in Fort Myers on a trip with her father to visit her grandparents, and had visited the Lee Memorial Health Park earlier the previous day, where she had remarked that she really wanted to go for a swim in the retention pond. Michelle told her father that she was headed off to bed at approximately 2:30 a.m., which would be the last time she was ever seen alive again. The following day, at approximately 10 a.m., Michelle's father noticed she was not in her bed, and he frantically searched for her. When he searched at the retention pond, he found her nightgown on the ground near the water and subsequently contacted authorities. Michelle's body and the offending gator were located by officials at 11:30 a.m. that morning. The alligator that had perpetrated the attack was a 7-foot, 11-inch long male alligator, which was confirmed to have consumed Michelle following an autopsy. On March 8, 2005, a 52-year-old truck driver named Don Owen was observed visiting a convenience store in Lakeland, Florida. However, following his stop at the store, Don seemingly vanished. He was reported missing the following day, March 9th, and despite some efforts to locate him, his family and authorities were not able to do so. However, nearly a week after his disappearance, on March 15, 2005, 2 fishermen stumbled across his body while visiting a local pond. Authorities were able to track the offending gator down, which was an 8-foot 9-inch long, 300-pound male alligator that was later found with Don Owen's forearm in its stomach. However, authorities noted that the location of Don's body was rather unusual, as the seemingly innocuous and unspectacular pond was located more than 12 miles from Don's home. The autopsy of the animal further revealed to authorities that it had been fed by people, which likely emboldened it and blunted its instinctual fear of humans. The next fatality would occur a mere few months later in July of 2005 in Port Charlotte, Florida. On the evening of July 15th, 2005, a 41-year-old man named Kevin Albert Murray had just completed some lawn work for one of his clients when he decided to take a dip to cool down after a hot day of work, a personal tradition of his. For this fateful swim, he was seen by his clients jumping into the nearby Apollo waterway at 7:15 p.m. that evening. Not long after entering the water, the clients ashore saw him disappear beneath the surface of the water, and alarmed at the sight, the homeowners contacted authorities, who arrived on scene at 7:45 p.m. It took officials less than 10 minutes to locate the gator that had perpetrated the attack, as they saw the gator emerge from the water with Kevin's body still lodged in its jaws at 7:55 p.m. that evening. The wildlife and game officers startled the alligator, who released Kevin's body from its maw. However, it began to submerge again. As it began to submerge again, they were able to hit the gator with an arrow attached to a rope to reel it in closer to shoot it. The offending alligator in this attack was a massive 12-foot 2-inch long male alligator, and Kevin's death marked the final fatal alligator-related incident in Florida in 2005. On the evening of May 9th, 2006, a 28-year-old woman named Jovi Jimenez left her home in Sunrise, located in Broward County, Florida, to go for a nighttime jog. Jovi was last seen alive taking a breather on the jog, dangling her feet above a canal. The following day, on May 10th, construction workers discovered her mangled body, which was missing both arms, floating in the canal. In an unusual turn of events, an autopsy of Jovi revealed her cause of death was shock and blood loss, and her lungs contained very little water, which strongly suggested that she was killed on land and carried to the water by the alligator after she had died. Authorities speculated that perhaps she had drawn the attention of the gator when she was dangling her feet, with the gator stalking her for a little while before it leapt from the water and attacked her on land. The offending gator was tracked by authorities, and officials recovered both of Jovi's arms from within the 9-foot 6-inch long alligator's intestinal tract. Jovi's death would mark the first death in May of 2006. However, it would not be the last death of that same month. 4 days later, on May 14th, 2006, in Oldsmar, Florida, the dismembered remains of a 43-year-old homeless woman named Judy Cooper were discovered floating in a local canal, with wounds consistent with an alligator attack. Authorities located her purse and some of her personal items, including drug paraphernalia, along the canalway. Most of the details of the actual attack still remain unknown. However, an 8-foot 5-inch long female alligator was trapped and was later confirmed to be the offending assailant in the incident after an examination of its intestinal tract. Authorities speculated that perhaps she had simply been walking along the canal when an alligator ambushed her, and they also speculated that perhaps she may have been using drugs or was sleeping at the time she was attacked. Following an autopsy of Judy's body, it was estimated that the woman had been deceased for approximately 3 days, placing the date of her death as on or around May 11th, 2006. The very same day, on May 14th, 2006, a 23-year-old woman named Anne Marie Campbell, a tourist from Louisville, Kentucky, was snorkeling within the waters of Lake George, located in Ocala County, Florida. Anne Marie was snorkeling at a recreational swimming area near a remote cabin that she was staying at, when suddenly she was attacked by an 11-foot 4-inch long 407-pound gator, which clamped down with its powerful jaws on her head. Her stepfather and his wife, who were also snorkeling at the time, noticed that Anne Marie had gone missing and went out to search for her, where they found the gator with Anne Marie's torso and legs sticking out of its mouth, and noticed that she was still alive, but barely clinging to her life. Her family rushed the gator and attacked it, poking its eyes out with sticks and prying its jaws open with their hands. But by the time they managed to free Anne Marie from the gator's grip after several minutes of tussling with the large animal, she had died. Her death would mark the third alligator-related death in the span of less than a week, and the final casualty of 2006. The next fatal alligator attack would take place the following year in November of 2007. On November 13th, 2007, a 36-year-old Miami native and career criminal named Justo Padron, along with an unnamed accomplice, were burglarizing vehicles in the parking lot of the Miccosukee Tribe Resort Casino and Convention Center. Police were contacted, and after receiving several reports of their activities, tribal police responded to the scene, where upon seeing the officers, Justo, who had been wanted for an outstanding arrest warrant since September, fled on foot. Police officers pursued him, however, they lost track of him as he ran towards a nearby retention pond, which was marked with signage that read, "Danger, live alligators." His lifeless, gnawed-on body was discovered the following day floating in the retention pond, as he had apparently entered the pond in an effort to elude police. a 9-foot 3-inch alligator trapped nearby, was killed, and subsequently pieces of Justo were found in its intestinal tract. Justo's extremely Florida death would mark the final alligator fatality in Florida of the 2000s. The first deadly alligator attack of the 2010s wouldn't take place until the latter half of the decade, nearly 8 years later, in October of 2015. On October 16, 2015, a 62-year-old man named James Okurse was snorkeling alone in Blue Spring, Florida, and his body was found later that afternoon at the bottom of a channel in Blue Spring. Authorities combed the area for the offending gator, which they suspected was a 12-foot-long alligator that had been reportedly sighted multiple times in the area in the days preceding James's death. After killing the massive gator, pieces of James were recovered from within the reptile's digestive tract. The following month, in November of 2015, residents of the quiet neighborhood of Barefoot Bay in Mico, Florida, were terrorized by a string of home robberies that seemingly were targeting the homes of snowbirds who left them behind in the wintertime. On November 13, 2015, police received reports of 2 suspicious men clad in black walking around behind their homes, seemingly casing them for a suitable one to rob. When officers responded to the calls, the 2 suspects fled on foot, and both seemingly managed to successfully escape. Later that evening, residents of the area heard what they described as indistinguishable yelling. That same night, local police also received a report of a missing 22-year-old man named Matthew Riggins, who, it would turn out, was one of the men clad in black, when his mangled body was recovered 10 days later on November 23, 2015, with wounds consistent with an alligator attack. After police interviewed Matthew's girlfriend, authorities confirmed that he had been involved in the local robberies, as he had told his girlfriend on the 13th he was going to Barefoot Bay to rob houses. Due to the advanced state of the decomposition of his body at the time of its discovery, medical examiners could not pinpoint his exact date of death. While recovering Matthew's body, police divers noted aggressive behavior from a nearby 11-foot-long alligator, which they euthanized and was confirmed via autopsy to have pieces of Matthew in its digestive tract. Much like the first 2 deadly alligator incidents of the decade in Florida, the details of the third alligator attack of the 2010s are similarly sparse. On June 7, 2016, a man visiting Lake Hunter in Lakeland, Florida, noticed an object bobbing in the water a distance away from the shore, which he thought at first was a spare tire. However, he noticed that the bobbing object almost seemed as if it was being tugged at from below. After observing it for a while, he watched in horror as a 9-foot-long alligator rolled the bobbing object in the water, and he realized that it was not a tire, but the remains of a man clasped within the jaws of a gator. He then contacted authorities, who found the gator still clutching onto the body when they had arrived, with the gator appearing very defensive about the remains, and it even attempted to carry the body towards a storm drain to hide it from officials that were trying to recover it. Upon recovery of the remains, the advanced state of decomposition suggested that the still unidentified man had been in the water for several days, and much like with Matthew Riggins, medical examiners were unable to determine an exact date or manner of death for the man, who was later identified to be a 72-year-old homeless man named Richard Taylor. And although authorities were not able to definitively determine Richard's date of death, they estimated that he had been killed sometime around June 5th, based on the state of his body's decomposition. The next alligator-related fatality in Florida is perhaps the most widely known incident of them all, and took place at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort in Orlando, Florida. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on June 14, 2016, a 2-year-old boy named Lane Graves accompanied his family as they gathered on a beach along the edges of a man-made lake named the Seven Seas Lagoon to watch the movie Zootopia in an event organized by the resort. From approximately 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m., 2-year-old Lane joined the other children gathered there, making sandcastles, all of whom had wandered into ankle-deep water to gather materials. As Lane bent over to scoop up more sand and water at around 9 p.m., suddenly Lane was snatched by his head by a 7.5-foot-long gator from within the lagoon. Lane's father attempted to fight the alligator and pried at its jaws in an attempt to free his son, but as he was doing so, he was bitten on his leg by another 5 to 6 foot long alligator that had also been lurking nearby, and the gator that attacked Lane disappeared into the waters with the boy. Authorities and Lane's parents searched vigilantly for him throughout the night to no success. However, the next morning, Lane's body was located not far from the location of the initial attack, and his body was relatively intact, showing only evidence of bite wounds from the initial attack. Officials speculated that the gator released Lane not long after his father tried to free him from its jaws, as it was likely startled by the confrontation. However, an investigation into the incident found that the lagoon, while marked with no swimming signs at the time of Lane's death, did not have any signage warning of the risks of alligators in the area. And furthermore, it was also revealed that employees at the resort had received 2 reports of alligators from guests less than an hour before the attack, one of which noted the presence of a gator of what they estimated was less than 5 feet away from the children playing in the water. Several alligators in the area were euthanized, and authorities were confident that they had killed the alligator that had perpetrated the attack, although it could not 100% be determined that the gators they had killed had absolutely committed the attack due to the lack of consumed flesh in the incident. Just shy of 2 years after 2-year-old Lane Graves' death, on the morning of June 8, 2018, in Davie, Florida, a 47-year-old Japanese immigrant named Shizuka Matsuki packed her 3 pit bulls into her car to take them out for some exercise at the nearby Davies Wolf Lake Park, as she often did in the mornings. However, upon arriving at the park with her dogs in tow, she found that the park was closed for the day, so instead she opted to take her dogs for a walk at the Silver Lake Rotary Nature Park instead. While walking her dogs, she drew the attention of a massive 12-foot 6-inch long alligator, which attacked her and her dogs on dry land. Another visitor at the park saw her seemingly vanish from one second to the next, and immediately called 911 to report a potential alligator attack, memorably and frantically exclaiming at the start of the call, quote, "I think an alligator got this lady," he exclaimed. 2 of Shizuka's dogs fled the scene of the attack and ran back to the parking lot, while the caller noted that one of them remained in the shallow water, barking in the direction of the water and away from shore. Authorities arrived at the scene of the incident, and by the afternoon had located the perpetrating gator and subsequently euthanized it. Inside its digestive tract, they recovered one of Shizuka's arms, and later that evening, authorities located her dismembered remains. The dog that had not fled the site of the attack was found to have bite wounds from the gator as well, and authorities suggested that perhaps the dog had been what initially provoked the massive reptile. Shizuka Matsuki's death would mark the last alligator-related fatality in the state of Florida in the 2010s. The first alligator attack in Florida of the 2020s took place in Largo, Florida. On May 31st, 2022, at 8 a.m., visitors at a frisbee golf course along the shores of Taylor Lake discovered the dismembered body of a local 47-year-old man named Sean McGinnis. After arriving at the scene, medical examiners noted that he had likely died during the nighttime, as at the time of his body's discovery at 8 a.m., he had only been dead for a few hours at most. This rather bizarre finding puzzled authorities. However, it soon became apparent why Sean would be swimming in a lake that was clearly marked by warning signage that it contained alligators in the middle of the night. It turned out that Sean had frequently waded into the waters to retrieve lost frisbee golf discs, which he resold, an enterprise that was profitable enough that he was able to scrape out a modest living for himself doing so. Officials euthanized 2 gators following the discovery of Sean's body, neither of which were found to have been involved in the attack. However, unlike the other victims in this video, Sean was fully and intimately aware of the alligators that inhabited the waters of Taylor Lake, and the risk he took by entering these waters. It just so happened that Sean had been diagnosed with a pituitary gland tumor in the months before he began collecting the discs, and saw the potential dangers as an acceptable risk, his friends later told authorities. One added on, stating, quote, "He would have been upset that they're killing the gators," they said. Less than 2 months later, on the evening of July 15th, 2022, in Englewood, Florida, an 80-year-old woman named Rosemarie Wigand was tending to her lawn, part of which was on a sloped bank leading to a pond. At approximately 7:47 p.m., she was pulling weeds on the sloped section of the lawn when she slipped and lost her balance, and subsequently tumbled into the water below. Rosemarie thrashed about in a panic within the water in an attempt to keep herself afloat. However, the commotion attracted the attention of 2 alligators within the pond, which neighbors witnessed approaching her not long after she'd stumbled into the pond's murky waters. The gators then attacked Rosemarie, pulling her into the water before she could escape to safety. When Florida Fish and Wildlife officials arrived, Rosemarie had already died, and authorities then euthanized 2 alligators, one measuring 8 foot 10 inches long, with the second gator measuring 7 foot 7 inches long, which, following autopsies, were confirmed to be the offending animals from the attack. The final alligator attack death recorded in Florida, at least as of the making of this video, occurred on February 20th, 2023 in Fort Pierce, Florida. At around noon that day, an 85-year-old woman named Gloria Surge took her Shih Tzu for a walk along the edge of a pond in her 55 and older retirement community. Much like the previous incidents involving dogs, Gloria's pooch drew the attention of an alligator that was lurking within the waters of the pond, and it leapt out to attack the dog. Gloria saw this and attempted to protect her dog, and subsequently became the target of the 10-foot-long alligator's vicious assault. The gator latched onto Gloria's leg and pulled her into the water, where the commotion alerted one of her neighbors, who rushed out to attempt to aid her. The neighbor witnessed Gloria valiantly fighting for her life against the apex predator and saw her disappear beneath the surface of the water once, only for her to manage to fight her way to the surface, where she gasped for air. The neighbor then witnessed her disappear once more beneath the surface of the water. However, she would not re-emerge this second time. Her body was later recovered from the pond with several deep gashes and bite marks from the brutal attack. The 10-foot alligator was then removed by Florida Fish and Wildlife officials from the pond's water and was subsequently euthanized, and it was confirmed in an autopsy to have been the perpetrator of the attack that claimed the life of Gloria Surge. Her Shih Tzu did, however, survive the attack, despite it being the initial target of the massive reptile. Thank you all for watching.